cloud. Perfect. So let's go ahead and just get started, and feel free to keep putting your information in the chat, and we'll keep reading it. But tonight we are joined by three really incredible speakers, and I'm just going to read like the first line of their bios because they're so long and impressive, but just know that there's a lot more um, behind each of these people. So we have Thomas Plant, who is the Aug Augustin Cardinal Bia SJ University professor, thank you, professor of psychology and by courtesy religious studies and the Jesuit School of Theology at Santa Clara University and directs the Applied Spirituality Institute. That was a little bit hard to get through, but really cool. We also have Joseph Currier, who is a licensed psychologist and professor of psychology at the University of South Alabama. His research broadly focuses on understanding and addressing the multifaceted role of spirituality / religion in trauma, moral injury, and other mental health challenges in education, training, and clinical practice. And finally, we have Crystal Park, who is Board of Trustees Distinguished Professor of Clinical Psychology at the University of Connecticut. Her research focuses on the psychology of religion and spirituality, multiple aspects of stress and coping, and yoga. So I'll go ahead and pass it over to you all and let me know. I can make you all co-host in case you aren't able to share yet. Um, but also just as a point of courtesy throughout the meeting, if anyone becomes unmuted, I'll just mute you so that we can hear what our speakers are saying. And then at the end of the meeting, we should have about 15-20 minutes for questions. And so once we get to that point, I'll just invite you to raise your hand and we'll call on you. So please take it away.
All right, well, it's good to see everybody tonight. Thanks for joining. Charlotte, thanks again for organizing this webinar. So we got a three-part plan tonight. We're going to do three segments. We're going to start with kind of an overview and kind of some of the sort of unique features and aims of the two journals that Division 36 sponsors. One, Psychology of Religion and Spirituality, or we often call it PRS. And the second one is Spirituality and Clinical Practice. So as you both know, all of you know, Dr. Park and Dr. Plant are longtime editors of both of these journals. And then I have the honor of taking the baton from Dr. Plant for SCP, over the next 6 years. So we're going to start with kind of an overview of these two journals, and then I'm going to make some general comments, about some unique concerns to be mindful of as we think about publishing in our area of psychology of spirituality and religion. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Park to get us started.
Thank you, Joe. Yeah, I'm glad we will have a lot of time. I just wanted to say for discussion tonight, because I think that more than just presenting, this is an opportunity for people to ask questions and to have some dialogue around publishing, because it obviously is a really important piece of our science. So definitely want to keep some time for that. Okay, let's see. I'm going to share a little PowerPoint with y'all. See if that works. Okay, it says I'm sharing. Can people see that?
I'm just seeing, oh, there you go. Now I
Okay.
can see it.
All right. And I'll try to get it from the start. Okay, so please move this window away from the shared application. Okay. I don't know if anyone else can see that, but that's weird. Okay, so psychology of religion, spirituality, as Joe said, we often refer to it as PRS. It has been a pleasure to serve as the editor of this journal. It is a journal that has been published quarterly. We've been playing around with how many pages works to even to have it like 6 times a year, or to have bigger quarterly. As an editor, you get to think about these things that when you just read a journal, probably it doesn't cross your mind. But we currently have an impact factor of 2.2, and the journal is there's kind of a distinction between this journal and the spirituality and clinical practice, in that this is a journal that is owned by and overseen by I mean, it's an APA journal, but it is through the division, so or the society, so it is kind of grew up in that space. So let's see. Whoa, yeah. Okay. Um, so let me just give you a little bit of background. Um, this journal has been around now for a while. We are in the early 2000s. Ralph Piedmont and a number of other people were talking about how the division really needed sort of a flagship journal, and that idea had been around for quite a while, and then it really took off in the mid aughts, I guess. And our first issue came out in February of 2009. So at this point, we've been around for 16 years. Ralph Piedmont was the founding editor. I was on that initial editorial board. So I have been with the journal since its inception. And just the second editor of that, I assumed the role, this is my second 5-year term right now. And uh sorry to skip around. This is the scope of the journal according to our website, and we haven't revisited this for a while, but we aim to publish peer-reviewed original articles related to the psychological aspects of religion and spirituality that are state of the art and advance the science of psychology of religion and spirituality. The journal publishes articles employing experimental and correlational methods, qualitative analyses, and systematic reviews of the literature. We publish both full-length research reports and brief reports. And these are the statistics that I just got from Hillary Peterman today. So this 2024 column is totally brand new. So I asked her for it for today, and it wasn't quite ready, but she sent it as soon as it was, and here it is. So what you can see on that top row is the submissions to our journal are pretty hardy. I think in 2020, people had a lot of time on their hands because of COVID. So we had we had like a kind of bulge in submissions there in 2020 and 21. And then it's sort of been holding a little steadier. And this year we had an uptick again. So we have, pretty robust submissions. But when you look at the acceptances that we have, it's a pretty small ratio of things that get submitted to things that get accepted. We are aiming for a rejection rate around 70-ish%. And it has, in spite of our best efforts, it kind of crept up in 2024 instead of getting a little more lenient. So that is a little daunting when you are someone who is thinking about submitting a manuscript. And I just want to say that a lot of these rejections are desk rejections. Um, and I imagine more so than your average journal, it's due to inappropriateness. It's not a good fit to our journal. So in that last slide, I emphasized the word psychological because we are the psychology of religion and spirituality. And we get a lot of religious studies, anthropology, um, things that might be fine scholarship, like a lot of humanities type things, but they're not a good fit here. And so I don't know if folks on this webinar, or if you're looking at this later, but if you are someone who tends to review for journals, you know that the system is really stressed, that people are submitting so many articles that every peer reviewer gets hit up a lot to peer review. And so if I get an article that I know is not going to be a good fit, or just it doesn't meet the bar in terms of the rigor and novelty of the of the profile of the journal, then I will just reject it at the start so that my associate editors don't have to deal with it, so that we don't have to, bother a lot of peer reviewers for something that is really not gonna make it. So I end up doing a lot of kind of cutting people off at the pass and just saying, thanks, but try elsewhere. And I don't know how to fix that because people see the word religion in the title of our journal and just assume it's going to fit there. And so that's a high rejection rate. Like that looks like an NIH rejection rate before the new administration. Now that it's even worse. But you're 90%. That's a tough bar. And I get it. And that's what it is right now. So um we had decided, Tom and Joe and I, to talk a little bit about what we're looking for in our journals as editors. And so when I'm doing that first pass through before I send an article out to an associate editor to find reviewers, um, we want cutting edge psychological science. And by that, I mean we want innovation. I cannot tell you how many articles we get where people do a correlation between some aspect of religion and some aspect of well-being like depression. And, in 1972, that might have been novel and something that would stand a chance of getting published, but like there's voluminous literature linking all these aspects of religion with well-being. So what are you adding to that conversation, right? So and I was thinking today about what is cutting edge, and I'd love to see stuff that I haven't even thought about. We're in a new era with lots of people who are doing alternative kinds of spiritualities, or integrating different aspects of technology into their religious or spiritual experiences. um, so some novelty. The other thing we're looking for are sophisticated research design. So cross-sectional correlational studies is not so great. We're really looking I mean, maybe if you had some incredible sample, like that would be really hard to get, like astronauts, which I have actually seen some research, psychological research with astronauts. So what is their spirituality like? Then you could justify maybe some simpler design. But by and large, we're really looking for people who have, adequate covariates, and thinking about longitudinal or cross-lag panels or latent variable. We're really thinking more sophisticated ways about the research. Um, and also a strong grounding in the empirical literature. So it's not like you just thought this up and said, "Hey, how do these two things go together?" But like it really comes from a body of literature. It really comes from what people have already established. And also theory. And if you study psychology of religion, you know that theory has been something that we have struggled to be strong in, and a lot of the research has tended to be kind of light in the theory department, or even not theoretically grounded. So we really love to see strong theory that would lead to the hypotheses in a study. Um, Strong measurement. One of the things that some of my associate editors really strongly disagree with, and get sort of bent out of shape about, is like a homegrown psych of religion scale, which at this point measurement in psych of religion spirituality is pretty sophisticated. So don't make up your own measure, unless you identify something that has never been measured before, right? So stick with psychometrically established instruments, um, and um, and then focus on the level of the individual. Again, this is a journal for psychology. This is not a journal for sociology. This is not a journal for um, political science. Clearly, the disciplines are related, but we're trying to stick with unit of analysis in psychology is the individual. So that is just kind of what we are looking for. So sometimes, if you have questions about whether your study is a good fit, I get a lot of emails with an abstract, and I can tell somebody based on that just what I think. Sometimes it's really hard to know what the actual study is like, but whether it's even a good fit, for example, usually I can tell with an abstract. Um, so I guess I think that's all I have. Yeah. So, so again, happy to have conversations about this maybe after we hear more about spirituality and clinical practice. Thank you.
So Joe, do you want me to go with okay.
Yep.
So I'm going to share first off, thanks a lot to Charlotte, Division 36 leadership, Crystal, Joe, and all of you who are here with us. Very much appreciated. I know people are busy, or it's summer, you'd rather be sitting at the beach or up in the mountains or wherever you're wanting, or hiking or whatever, but grateful that you're all here. Again, as Joe had mentioned, for the last half dozen years, I've been editor of Spirituality in Clinical Practice, and I'll go ahead and share my slide, and hopefully you can see that. Let's see. Okay. Okay, from the beginning. Here we go. Okay, so hopefully you can see that. So basically, the history of SCP, technically, actually, Spirituality in Clinical Practice is not a Division 36 journal. Technically, it is an APA journal, but it's not a division journal. And that really doesn't matter, I think, to most anyone. It doesn't matter to authors or readers or associate editors or anything like that. I think it really matters to the editor because I just don't have the middleman, if you will, that Crystal has. So in other words, we don't answer to the division, we just answer to APA publishing. So just as a FYI. And now we're much newer than psychology, religion, and spirituality. We've only been around for about a decade, a little over a decade. And it was started by co-editors of Lisa Miller and Len Sperry, who many of you may know. And they were the editors for those first few years, 2014, when the first edition came out, and then until 2018, through 2018. And then I took over in 2019, and my tour of duty ends at the end of this year, and Joe will take that baton at the beginning of January. So right now I am the outgoing editor, and Joe is the incoming editor. This kind of reminds me at the end of every year where you have the old man handing the baton to the baby as we begin the new year. So I'm sort of the old man, and Joe is the baby taking the baton. Something like that. As you can tell, one of the things I'm most proud of with the journal is the new cover. The old cover kind of looked like a slinky, and now I really like our new cover with all the symbols from the various religious traditions. And as you can tell, as the editors are passed the baton, they just get more and more handsome. um, uh, so I'm trying to, let's see, okay, get to my next slide. I'm trying to forward this. There we go. So the spirituality and clinical practice focus, really, it's more practice oriented. It's more applied. And I think that's the critical difference between psychology, religion, spirituality, and Crystal's journal and versus spirituality and clinical practice. We're much more applied. It's a practice-oriented journal that encompasses spiritually oriented psychotherapy and spirituality-sensitive cultural approaches to treatment, well-being. It'll look at assessment and things like that too, and consultation and all of that, which is great, but it's really kind of a more practice applied journal. And we do publish, in addition to your traditional articles, empirical studies and all that, we do publish reviews, commentaries, reflections, and practice case reports. And a lot of people actually don't take advantage of that, and I think they should. Now, in terms of our data, in terms of acceptances and all of that, you can see at the bottom of this slide, I highlighted in red the most recent data for throughout 2024.
Tom, I don't think your slide, for some, I don't know if your slides are going forward.
You
For
hold
some
on, you can't.
reason.
Okay, let me. Can you see this?
We see the history of SCP. Yeah.
Okay. You can see the history. Can you see that slide? No.
Maybe try stopping screen share and starting it
Okay.
up again.
All right. Sorry about that. Let's try this again. And I'm really embarrassed because I'm living here in the middle of Silicon Valley and I've got this. We're not supposed to have these problems in Silicon Valley. Okay. Can you see this one? The SPC focus? Yes. I see
Yeah.
some nodding. Okay. All right. So that was what I was just talking about in terms of our orientation. The next one is the data for acceptances and all. And you can see in red at the bottom, this is the most recent data, 2024. So we've got, basically about 100 submissions a year, and we're rejecting about 71% right now. And so if we look at the data over the past few years, as well as the previous data on this slide, you can see the journal is really growing rather quickly. We used to get about half of those number of subscriptions, and we'd have a rejection rate, closer to 50, 60%. And so more people are discovering the journal, more people are submitting and all of that. So it's really, and that makes a lot of sense given that now it's been out there for about 11 years. And so, it's on people's radar screen. The other thing I'm really happy about and proud of is that our turnaround time is pretty quick. We can get decisions, at least some preliminary decisions to authors within about a month. So our average is about a month between the time somebody submits something and the time they hear something. And that's pretty good in this day and age. We've done a bunch of special issues, and we're open to people's suggestions about special issues. So as an example, here's some special issues that we've been doing in recent years. There's been Islamic-based approaches, the spiritual and religious intersectionality. What that was about asking people who are professionals in the field from different religious traditions, how they integrate who they are with what they do. So, we have like a Jewish psychologist or a Islamic psychologist or a Catholic psychologist or evangelical Protestant psychologist or a Hindu or a Buddhist or indigenous and so forth, and speak to how they integrate who they are with what they do. That was kind of fun. We had, a special issue on trauma, and one's a special issue on religious leadership, psychological issues in religious leadership. We did one on prayer and communication with the divine, sacred, and the departed and demonic. We did one on LGBTQI plus clientele. We did one on Catholic clergy, multicultural and diverse issues, contemplative spiritual life trauma, and then Joe had done one on competencies. And so not only do we do a lot of special issues and special sections, but we're also very open to people's suggestions in that regard. Now, in terms of tips for authors, so a couple of things that people want to keep in mind, maybe if they're thinking about submitting their paper to spirituality and clinical practice, they might first make sure people follow APA style. I know that sounds obvious, but a lot of people just don't. A lot of people use medical style, you know. and or some variation on the theme of that. And so obviously we're an APA journal, we do APA stuff. I really don't think we should shy away from reviews, commentaries, reflections, and practice case reports for a couple of key reasons. One is, since we're an applied journal, it's not just about, empirical, like randomized trials and stuff like that. The other issue, as far as an editor is concerned, why I love these kind of papers, is because APA tells us how many pages we can use for each submission. So publishing will say, okay, Tom, it's time for the September issue of Spirituality in Clinical Practice. Here are all the manuscripts that have been accepted for publication, and we need you to give us 75 pages worth of, manuscripts. And then, of course, you start looking at the manuscripts and you try to package them up in a way that makes good sense, that flow, that maybe are thematic. And then when you finish, you find that you're 3 or 4 pages short. And you need another 3 or 4 pages to get that goal of 75 pages. And the best way to do that is these small commentaries, reflections, and practice case reports. Because most papers, the empirical papers, are going to be something like, 12, 15, 16 manuscript pages. And so it's nice to have some of these smaller pieces to put in at the end. Another tip is to keep the manuscripts under 30, keep the paper submissions under 30 manuscript pages. The issue there is sometimes people have terrific papers, but they're, 50, 60 pages long. We just can't handle that. And so it's important to keep it tight and focus on evidence-based clinical applications that would be interesting to psychology and related fields. Now, one issue that we often get, and there may or may not be people who are internationals on our webinar today, but we get an awful lot of papers from people when they say spirituality in clinical practice, they think we're a medical journal. And so it's a journal about surgery. I mean, it's a paper about surgery or about medical treatment of diabetes or other illnesses with kind of really no psychological element to it. And so we do want to be mindful that this is a psychology journal published by the American Psychological Association. And we're not, but I mean, social workers or psychiatrists or marriage and family therapists, licensed professional counselors, or are kind of kind of first cousins, if you will. But to make sure it's based on the work is on clinical applications and that are relevant to mental health, psychology, stuff like that. Now, in terms of future directions of the journal, I have to be a little careful because in a few short months, I pass the baton over to Joe, and he's going to run with it as he sees fit. I have a picture of my son happened to be a track runner in college, and he did the 4x4 and 4x1. So there's a picture of my son taking the baton in in the 4x4 in college. So Joe's going to have the baton, and it's kind of up to him to do as he sees fit. But that being said, I think there are a couple of things that might be worth keeping in mind, at least from my humble point of view. One has to do with more quality articles, more subscriptions, more engagement with other disciplines that are kind of related to us. Again, like social work, psychiatry, marriage and family therapy, licensed professional counselors, alcohol counselors, so more engagement with other disciplines, other religious traditions. We get a lot of papers that are looking at either Christianity or Islam. I mean, those two groups we don't get very many papers that focus on Judaism, Hinduism. We do get a fair amount on Buddhism, particularly as it relates to, mindfulness, but we don't get a whole lot. I think we could get more papers that are looking at Hindu tradition, indigenous traditions, Jewish traditions, that kind of thing. And APA is pushing hard for open access and open science. And that's a kind of a big deal. APA really wants us to do much more on the way of open access and open science. And so we have to be thoughtful about that. And then APA also is pushing hard on more diversity broadly defined in terms of authors and topics and so forth. And so these are some trends that we should be mindful about moving forward. And then I'll just say thank you very much to all of you and for our wonderful organizer, Charlotte, as well as Joe and Crystal and Division 36. Very grateful to be part of this panel, and we'll look forward to whatever questions you might have. And I'll stop sharing and hand the baton over to Joe.
Thanks, Tom. So Tom, I'm having to kind of hesitate to offer a Freudian interpretation. So you referred to me as baby, and there was a comparison to son too. So I'm feeling really, really touched, you know. No, Tom has done a fantastic job with the journal over the last 6 years. So he did not share that the journal has a 1.7 impact factor, you know, so at the time that Tom, you know, took the baton, I think he was building on the great work that Lisa Miller and Len Sperry did. But he was able, you know, a couple of years ago to get an impact factor, and that impact factor has increased, you know, over the last year or two. Which, you know, for those of us in this area, like we have a commitment, we're interested in, you know, spirituality and clinical practice. We're going to maybe submit our work there no matter what. But for folks, you know, kind of outside of our area that may not share our specialized interests, like having an impact factor makes a really, really big deal. Like they won't often not submit their work to journals that don't have an impact factor. So that's a really big deal. And, you know, as I think about the future, you know, of the journal, you know, I just really want to continue the great work that Tom has done. I'm going to be writing a spotlight article, you know, that kind of features some of our goals and our priorities, you know, over my coming term as editor. You know, I can say in general, you know, spirituality, you know, plays a really important complementary role, you know, to PRS, you know, so PRS, you know, just has an amazing reputation in the field. And when I look at that rejection rate, I can say that I have been in that percentage of rejections many times, you know, over the last decade. But like I'm okay with that, you know, because it means that, you know, the standards that PRS has, you know, for publishing scientific research, you know, that they're real and that they're adhering to them. Also, I can say, you know, colleagues, you know, who, you know, might dabble in psychology, religion, spirituality, but maybe it's not their area of emphasis. They have a lot of respect for PRS too. So it's just gained a lot of respect in our profession in general. And as Crystal highlighted, you know, PRS is a journal that, you know, I mean, publishes the work of social psychologists and personality psychologists and other, you know, branches of experimental psychology, along with clinical counseling, you know, and then other, you know, disciplines as well, you know, whereas, you know, SCP is a journal, you know, that ideally is taking, you know, that basic science that PRS publishes and finding ways to move it and translate it into clinical practice, right? So ideally, you know, SCP will be, you know, the landing, you know, page in space, you know, for people that are attempting to, you know, to do translational research, you know, and we can define translational research very broadly from, you know, developing a particular model of an intervention, you know, all the way to, you know, doing a pilot study or, you know, ultimately doing, you know, randomized controlled trials, you know, efficacy and effectiveness studies. You know, so we really want to be publishing kind of applied translational resource that kind of cuts across, you know, the way that NIH would define, you know, translational research. All right, so I'm just going to very, very quickly, because we want to leave plenty of time, you know, for discussion. I'm just going to kind of talk about, you know, some of the special issues, you know, in publishing in psychology of, you know, spirituality and religion. And I don't necessarily think that all of these issues are unique, for kind of other, APA disciplines or folks that are doing research in other areas. So, I mean, I probably don't need to talk too much about this, but just in case, there's any graduate students, here on the webinar tonight, or folks that are maybe a little bit earlier in your careers, and you may kind of wonder about kind of how does the peer review process work? So this is a flow diagram that actually comes from Wiley, so it doesn't totally match what we do, at PRS and SCP. But so initially, a researcher scholar will submit their article, to APA, and then each of our journals we have, an administrative kind of assistant reviewer, who is employed by APA, and they support a number of journals, and they do a very quick, administrative review, just to ensure that, the article is, appropriate for the journal. And then that there's a series of kind of compliance questions that they need to address. And then it's sent, to the editor. And then, we do a very careful review, of the paper, because we know that, our kind of associate editors and consulting editors, have a lot on their plates, and we don't want to send along papers to them that we don't think have a really good chance at getting published. So, we end up, desk rejecting a lot of papers, for reasons that both Crystal and Tom have already highlighted. And then from there, the paper, goes out to reviewers. Reviewers, typically, will, take, anywhere from a month. We want to try to get reviews back in, 3 months at the most. And then, the reviews will go to the associate editor, who we would assign the paper to, who has who we think has good expertise in that area. And then they'll make a decision about whether, the paper is suitable, for acceptance, which rarely happens, to get an acceptance, after initial set of reviews. Best case scenario is typically either getting, a request for minor revisions, or a revise and resubmit, which would mean that, the associate editor will likely send the paper back out for peer review, and then, that cycle can, sometimes, go for as many as 2 or 3 iterations, depending on how responsive the author is, to the reviewer feedback. Okay, I'm gonna just kind of share some kind of important kind of suggestions, for folks, who would like to, have a good chance of publishing in either one of our journals. And again, I think these suggestions would go for other journals as well. Yeah, I think I would encourage everybody to familiarize yourself with reporting standards for different types of articles. So APA, has developed, what we often call the JARS, and there are articles that are published, in the American Psychologist. You can also find the information, on the website, for APA. And they've put together committees, who have laid out, the standards, for the information that needs to be reported in a quantitative research study or a qualitative research study, mixed method study, as well as kind of how to be addressing issues related to race, ethnicity, and other cultural factors. So I would encourage everybody, if to review the JARS, for whatever type of study you're doing, and make sure that you're adhering to those standards in your submission. And I also would encourage you, like, don't hesitate to cite the JARS papers, and even make a statement that, that we adhered to, Levitt et al., in conducting our qualitative study. I think a lot of, for us, like for me, who's handling the new submissions, a lot of the desk rejections for qualitative studies, for example, there's often very, very small samples, but there's a lack of adherence to the guidelines that, we would define and that we want to hold each other to, who are doing qualitative research. Also, if you're publishing review articles, whether it's a meta-analysis or a systematic review or a scoping review, you want to review the PRISMA guidelines, and there are other guidelines for reviews as well. If you're doing an RCT, you want to familiarize yourself with the consort guidelines, and there are other guidelines as well, for RCTs. And I would just encourage everybody, review the guidelines, adhere to the guidelines in your paper, and make it explicit in your method section that you are adhering to these guidelines. And you can even say, these are the ways that we're ensuring that we're adhering to the best practice guidelines for this particular design. Also, as with kind of other kind of areas of research, there's been a real movement, to embrace, open science principles and practices in our psychology of religion and spirituality area. So Ward Davis, Kevin Ladd, and a couple other editors, led a project that was called the Open Science of Religion Project. And, they were able to kind of support kind of 20 teams, that conducted registered report studies, for either PRS, or other psychology of religion and spirituality journals. So I would encourage everybody to try to get in that stream and, as much as you possibly can, to start adopting kind of open science practices yourself. If you're an academic like me, you'll know that there's often a lot of pressure to be publishing, to be getting your work out there, to be, getting funding. Right. And that kind of under these, really stressful conditions, I think sometimes, we can make, questionable decisions, as researchers, so here would be kind of some of the problems, that have faced not just, our area, but just psychological research in general. Right. And open science, is a way of, I think ensuring that we truly are, doing, high quality research. Two, that we have credibility and the public can trust us. And three, that we make, our work accessible, for folks. So I would encourage, if you're not familiar with, the open science movement, or different open science practices, I would encourage you to familiarize yourselves with kind of open science practices. Here would be kind of some of the practices that you could adhere to. As you look at these different practices, all of them may not be feasible for all of us. I think at minimum, I would encourage everybody to start pre-registering your work. Even if you've already gathered your data, just do a pre-registration. And then I would encourage everybody, as standard practice, and I think PRS is already doing this. I think this is something that we'll start doing in SCP as well, over the coming years. And I think other APA journals are doing this as well, to have, what's often called, a transparency and openness statement in your method section where you address, your adherence to, to open science practices. I think it's important to highlight as well, that APA, which is the organization that sponsors and supports both of these journals, is staying the course, when it comes to multicultural diversity. With that said, we've had, a lot of changes, and kind of erasure and policies, that laws that have kind of occurred, in states across the country, and that often trickles down, to academic departments. So we just wanted to highlight that we're still, really trying to be value driven when it comes to, emphasizing, diversity, equity, inclusion, in our journals. And that also, we also recognize that kind of many of us are working in institutions where it might be kind of complex, to address these concerns. And we want to work with you, as editors. And then also, we probably don't need to talk too much about this, but, I mean, my goodness, how is artificial intelligence changing the way that we work? I mean, and I know it's changing the way that we do research in my lab. Um, and this is, something that, we haven't, come up with real solutions for yet, but I know it's also probably changing the way that people are writing their manuscripts sometimes. It's changing everything. So I think, there are a lot of opportunities, when it comes to using artificial intelligence, in the research process. Uh, but there are also a lot of challenges, in using it. And I think I think, Crystal, correct me if I'm wrong, PRS does not have an AI statement or policy yet. No, and neither do we. So we don't really have clear guidance to give right now. But I think that's something that's definitely going to be on the horizon. I know a lot of journals will ask for a disclosure statement if you did use any AI, in the production of your manuscript. That's not something that we're requiring right now, but I think it would be a good thing, to disclose as part of your manuscript. And that's it. So let's use the rest of the time for questions.
Thank you all so much. You really covered so much important territory there. So we have 12 more minutes. I'll invite, yes, round of applause, first of all, but I'll go ahead and invite people to start just raising your hands, and I'll call on you and you can share your questions. You want to go ahead, Carrie?
Yeah, hi. I'm retired, so I'm not looking to publish, but one of the issues I've sometimes experienced in writing for journals in religious and theological studies, because I've done both psychology and religion and theological studies, is, and I've cautioned students, is to cite articles that are published in that journal. So there's a sense I'm contributing to an ongoing discussion in this community of scholars. Is that an important concern for you?
It's a great question. I mean, I think we just informally kind of often do that. But I don't, there certainly hasn't been any policy, certainly not with SCP about that. I mean, it's thoughtful to do that. And I think a lot of us probably do that just in an informal basis. But um, uh, but I think there is something to be said, a larger issue, Carrie, about these projects shouldn't necessarily be one-offs. It should be an ongoing discussion among colleagues and scholars and so forth to move the field forward together, not just by somebody's lab who's cranking stuff out regardless of what else is going on, but that somehow we're at least depending on what topic you're investigating, that you're sort of doing this together and that the journal has some thematic way of understanding a certain issue or whatever as colleagues. And so it makes a whole lot of sense. It's just nothing formal in that regard.
Thanks, Carrie, for the question. And I will say I'm a big fan of your books on pastoral care. So it's nice to see you. Leoa, I think I saw your hand up just now.
Thank you. And thank you to all the presenters. I have a question about special issues, and I think Dr. Plant said that the journal was open to special issue ideas. I'm wondering how someone goes about doing that and what kinds of information is helpful for you to evaluate that idea.
Yeah, I mean, we love special issues and special sections. Now, remember, so you know the difference. A special issue is that all the papers in that issue are going to be on that topic, whereas a special section is just a subset. Maybe 3 or 4 papers out of maybe 10 papers or 11 papers or something like that, and will highlight a certain section. And so if people have interests, and I've always been enthusiastic about this, that they could then just approach the editor and say, hey, look, I think we should have a special section or a special issue about this important topic because it hasn't been really adequately covered and it is timely and important. And I've got expertise in this area and I'm willing to spearhead this thing. And we'll say, great, you come up with a call for papers, that we can advertise, call, saying, hey, everybody, we want to do this special issue or this special section. And if you have expertise in this area, then we'd love to hear from you and hand in like an abstract just so we know what you're thinking about. And then you may have colleagues in this area that you know and that you think, oh, geez, I'd love to put these people together and come up with something. And then I think we're enthusiastic about this. We had Joe, and then we had Joe be, for example, a special guest editor of a special issue on competencies. And then we had Carrie York, who used to be one of our associate editors, do a special issue on Islamic issues and so forth. So I think this is a great thing. And one of the nice things about it is when you get a journal and you look at a dozen or more papers that are kind of scattered all over the map, it can be a little discombobulating as opposed to saying, oh, I'm going to learn a lot about this one particular topic. And it has some coherence and they all kind of hang together. And that's a wonderful thing. So I think, again, I'm the outgoing editor, so I can't speak for Joe, and I certainly can't speak for Crystal, but I think these things are great. And if you've got an idea, that's great. And Carrie, just in case you're listening, even if you're retired, doesn't mean you can't spearhead something if you'd like to. Just saying.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
Oh, hi everyone. So I just want to say thank you guys so much for giving your presentation on this. I think it was really useful, especially in terms of being a current graduate student, knowing like a little bit about like what's going behind the scenes with the peer review process, because I feel like that was like a whole like black box thing in terms of just like from an author perspective. So thank you guys so much. Just one question. I was wondering if you guys have any sort of like methodological like no-nos that we should be aware of as potential authors submitting to these journals. I think Crystal was talking a little bit about that, how trying to shift away from like cross-sectional correlational sort of analyses. I was wondering if there's like other specific like quantitative and methodological no-nos that we should be aware of as authors as well.
That's sort of a big question. Is there like a particular type of study or design that you're?
Yeah, well, one thing I was thinking about was like mediation analysis. I think there's like a huge sort of conversation of whether we should allow like cross-sectional mediation analyses or only have mediation analyses longitudinally. I was wondering like where maybe these journals like align with that in particular.
Yeah, and Crystal, Tom, feel free to just share. So I would have a hard time justifying like a cross-sectional mediation analysis for like a full article right now.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I know that like that the field's gone back and forth on it, and right now there's a group of statisticians who are arguing that you can test mediation in cross-sectional analyses, but the counter argument that a lot of the associate editors at PRS feel is that you're talking about a pathway, so there has to be some temporal sequencing. So if you measure everything at the same time, it's not really operating sequentially, right? Because everything's measured. It's something that is evolving again. But right now, I think the associate, and I should mention, I mean, I didn't list who my associate editors are, but my associate editors are an amazing team of folks, and I have I involve them a lot in in the operations of the journal. You know, we meet on a regular basis, and a lot of times before I desk reject something, I will consult with one or two of them to make sure that, you know, to see what they think, and if anybody thinks that something should be sent out, if I'm on the fence. So I really, I work my associate editors, and they are pretty involved, and a number of them feel pretty strongly that cross-sectional mediation is just not a thing right now. And then and again, that might change. The field might evolve again with some new statistical whatever. But right now that's kind of where we've landed.
Crystal, let me ask a question. So one of the opportunities that PRS has, and this is something that, you know, I'd like, you know, SCP also to have in the coming years, is the option to publish brief reports. You know, so would you if it's a good sample with strong measures, would you not even for a brief report?
No, I mean, just methodologically, people feel like that's just you. I mean, we use brief reports, right? So brief reports are if you have like some findings that are pretty narrow that just don't, you'd have to really pad a paper to get like 30 pages, right? So it's really, they're short. I think they're 12 pages or something, manuscript pages. But kind of to the point, and they're nice if you have some strong rationale analyses, but it's just not a full paper.
Yeah.
I notice we're getting really close to the end of our time together. So let's jump to Priscilla's question. And Andre, I don't think we'll have time to get to your question, but I invite you to reach out to the speakers individually, and feel free to email me if you need their contact info, as long as they're okay with that. But Priscilla, you go ahead.
Thanks so much for your presentation. I think I had a similar question to Jason regarding the sophisticated research designs that Dr. Park mentioned. And so I'm curious about like needs assessments that cover qualitative studies or mixed method designs, and how would we, is there like, do we go to JARS to figure out if it's a sophisticated research design, or how would we
Yeah,
sort
I
of
would
figure
say
that out?
for qualitative research, and I am not a qualitative researcher, but some of my associate editors are, and
Yeah.
they get, you know, a lot of people call things qualitative research, and they're not using anywhere close to like JAR standards or current standards. So for qualitative research, I would definitely say to look at the JARs. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
We have time for Andre. We have like 1 minute.
Yeah, feel free to jump in, Andre.
Awesome. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I don't know if a minute's going to be enough. I've been looking around trying to publish something, but my research was in a space that's somewhat controversial. Depending on who you talk to, people will either use the term cults or new religious movement or high control group. I'm just trying to get more of an idea of like if, for example, this journal would be appropriate for publishing my research. Is this something can bounce off of you by submitting my abstract or sending you my dissertation, or what's I've never done anything like this. What's the
Yeah,
best
probably
way?
don't send me your dissertation, but I'd be happy to look at an abstract, sure.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. And Andre, if you're part of the division listserv, that would probably be a good place to reach the editors also. If you're not, you can just Google Division 36 listserv and it'll give you.
Yeah, that's a great idea, Charlotte. And I mean, and there are other journals. So PRS and Spirituality and Clinical Practice are not the only two psycho-religion journals. So there, you know, there's archives and IJPR, and there's a number of them that the group could direct you to. So thank you. That's a great advertisement for our listeners.
Awesome. Okay, well, it's 9:01. So we'll cut it off here, but thank you all so much. First of all, to our presenters for your incredible information that you shared, and also to everyone who attended and your questions. I'll be posting a recording of this in, you know, a week or so on our website. So if you want to watch it again, you're welcome to, and spread the word. And otherwise, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
And Charlotte.
Thanks. Bye.
Yeah.